Hello again. In this video I will conclude Chapter 9, the Russian domain, and we'll talk about the economic and social development and some of the geopolitical topics of the Russian domain. And the whole thing that happened after the collapse of the communist state was the change in the relationship between the Soviet republics into a less predictable flow. And instead of it being from the top down, from the Soviet government down, now it became more informal capitalist foreign trade. And eventually most of those old republics broke away. We talked about the stans in a previous video. And Russia still retains an overwhelming economic presence in the region because of energy. And Siberia has huge reserves of natural gas that they've only begun to exploit and extract in the last generation. Another issue is privatization and state control, and that began under Gorbachev in 1985 when he created his perestroika plan or restructuring. And that was an attempt to reform many of the practices that had gone on under the command economy, under communism. Managers that were mismanaging firms were supposed to be reported. They were trying to make things more efficient. Basically, they were trying to end the totalitarian state. And in 1993, after Gorbachev is out of office and Yeltsin is in there, they tried to have privatization initiatives that offered millions of people the opportunity to buy into agricultural lands and industrial companies, but abuses resulted, mismanagement and corruption are rampant. Belarus still has many, or Belarus has many inflexible state-owned companies. Agriculture suffers. We talked about the short growing seasons. Some of the soils have been made acidic because of human activities, and rainfall has been unpredictable with the change in the global climate. Economic systems do not matter, and little has changed in the last 25 years. There is a big informal economy. It's not the barrio or favela ghetto phenomena that we've seen in other regions, but it's more of an informal black market where people go to exchange goods and services. I don't know, swap meet, maybe you could call that. Carnival, some sort of activities where people just they sell their wares in a, not a regulated mall type market existence. There are many state-run enterprises still, mainly in the energy sector, especially since Mr. Putin reasserted control earlier in the 21st century. Gazprom is a huge natural gas company, and it's pretty much still run by government. The middle class is growing in urban areas, while poverty is on the rise in rural settings. Wealth is highly concentrated, and I don't know about this anymore. Does Moscow, this is from a couple of years ago, does Moscow today in 2018 have more billionaires than any other city in the world? I'm not sure. And many villages in southern Siberia are at the opposite end of the scale. They don't have any telephones, jobs, or money. Now, can that change if Gazprom starts to extract and develop the natural gas that they know the reserves are there? Is that going to change this particular status as it is now? The challenge of corruption is a big problem in Russia. Doing business often means lining the pockets of government officials, company insiders, or trade union representatives. Organized crime remains pervasive, and it controls many aspects of the economy. The mafia provided critical capital and jobs to many unemployed young men in the early years of the collapse, after the collapse of communism. And the mafia is global today. They're involved in money laundering with all these different banks, and sometimes they get their hands on International Monetary Fund investments, and they control where those are going. We've talked about the health problems. Street crime has increased. When state-run companies go out of business, people aren't employed and they can't find any other work. There's rising housing costs. That's been going on in any urban area in the world. That is a phenomenon today. And with the government not so much involved in social welfare, many families have been hit hard. 1/3 of divorced women face domestic violence. Rape is an all too common problem in many villages. There's a shortage of vaccines and medical services, and some diseases have come back, like cholera, typhus, and even the bubonic plague. Chronic illnesses related to lifestyle have produced the highest mortality rates in the developed world. For cardiovascular or heart disease, alcoholism is a big problem in Russia, and so is smoking. AIDS is on the rise, mainly among the drug-using population, and we've talked about many of the toxic waste conditions that have extracted a huge price, and the impacts are ongoing. And the infant mortality rates in rural regions are higher than in many less developed regions of the world. Geopolitically, we've already talked about the Cold War that existed between the USSR and the United States from 1947 until about 1991. Today, there was a war in Chechnya. There is energy there. And the Russians are not going to let this region break away like they have other republics. They're keeping control of it. And since this war went on, Russia has become a more authoritarian government. Well, Mr. Putin never stepped down. And after the slain Chechnyan president Kadyrov was eliminated, they put his son in power about 11 years ago. And basically that's the big issue today, the status of President Putin, who is violating their constitution. He's been in power for years. What's going to happen with that? It's unknown at this time. And that ends the Russian domain.